The story revolves around Niro, a slave boy, in a world whose peace was once threatened by the Shadow Lord Secneum. Join Niro and his mission to change a world where slaves are not treated as humans. The story starts by introducing us to a couple. They're on their way back after collecting logs in the woods when they stumble upon an area littered with rotting corpses. They didn't give much of a reaction, indicating that these kinds of scenes were common in their world. As they continue to go their way, the cries of a baby come out of nowhere. As the two turn back, they find a baby in the arms of a dead elf. His father probably left to get milk. At first, they held back their urges to help the child, but as the cries continued, the woman couldn't help but save the child. It was then revealed that the couple are slaves, which explains why they were hesitant to save the baby. They didn't want to bring a baby into their hellish world. Fast forward to 5 years later, we're met with a child once again, who the couple has named Niro, the main protagonist of the story. We also find the mother, who is now pregnant. Since Niro is now 6 years old, the father takes him to a hatch hidden by a piece of cloth. The hatch leads to a hidden tunnel built by the father's ancestors. The tunnel is filled with books, and the father explains that this place was made by their ancestors to prepare their descendants. The father then instructs Niro to keep that place a secret and use it to silently prepare for when the world inevitably changes. That's a death flag, if I ever saw one. True enough, the father dies on the next panel. On his grave, we see Niro, his mother, and two little girls, Niro's siblings. So several years must have passed since the father revealed the tunnel. While in grieves in the father's grave, an unfamiliar man appears, who's then revealed to have killed Niro's father by putting poison in his medicine. The man plotted the death of Niro's father because he regretted not being able to buy the mother at the auction house in the past. This man is a mega simp. Knowing this, the mother was furious. But since the man is a commoner and has a higher social status as slaves, the mother cannot do anything but curse him. As the man is leaving, he foreshadows the possibility that the woman would be sold off as she's no longer useful. A few days later, the mother did end up getting sold by the master to his husband's killer. She cannot do anything but comply, leaving Niro alone with his two siblings. Poor Niro got orphaned twice now. Shortly after, Niro and his siblings find his mother lying dead in the street. The hair of death wins again. Niro can't do anything but cover his siblings' eyes. In the background, the killer is being arrested by two guards. Niro, with his newfound determination, decides to make the change his father once sought and protect his remaining family. Dang, the author really did the MC dirty. Niro continues to train in hopes of becoming strong enough to protect his family, as Niro and his two siblings, Wendy and Sylvie, prepare to sleep. The twin girls express their concerns about going to different masters. So, Niro explains to them his goal to turn himself and his siblings into commoners by graduating in the academy, Excanum, where the current emperor, who was once a slave, graduated from. So the emperor basically had a hero story. 1 year later, the emperor visits the town where Niro resides to attend a meeting. He was met with the nobles managing the region, the Regus family, and was introduced to the young master, Even, who, like Niro, plans to attend the Excanum Academy when he grows up. The emperor and Evan take a leisurely walk to his treehouse and engage in a conversation, in which Even expresses his desire to become a magician like his father and showcases his talent to manipulate magic at a young age. Suddenly, a herd of bulls starts stampeding in their direction. The guards tried to stop them but failed. Even, on the other hand, was able to stop one bull with his magic. Damn, even a kid was better than the guards. As the emperor prepares to unsheath his sword, Niro appears and stops the bulls with his power to commune, a power unique to elves. Little bro has that bull riz. All but one bull stops, which Niro promptly finishes off by grabbing a sword nearby and stabbing it. The emperor asks Niro if he used magic or communed with the bulls, to which Niro denies, as he explains it was because he was the one who fed the bulls, and animals are hesitant to attack those who feed them. When asked for a reward, Niro expresses his desire to attend Excanum, shocking everyone, including Evan. However, it turns out Niro communed with the animals to attack the emperor, and his heroic act was part of a malicious plan to receive a reward from the emperor. The emperor saw through this, so he punished Niro by sending him to the mines to labor for the rest of his life. Who would have thought tricking the emperor was a bad idea? That night, Niro, a bunch of other slaves, and escorts are on their way to the mines. During the trip, some slaves talk about their destination, a magic ore mine. One of the slaves explains that magic ore is known to be addictive to monsters, so monster attacks are common in mines which pose a risk to miners. So basically, monsters just want to get high. Relatable. At home, we find Wendy and Sylvie, who are worrying about their future now that they're alone. As Wendy reassures Sylvie, Two people enter the house, the elder master and a noble with blonde hair. The blonde noble wants to buy the twins for 300 gold. However, the master is reluctant to sell the two due to the nasty rumors about the buyer. But the noble continues to increase the price he's willing to pay. When the price reaches 600 gold, the elder master's expression changes. This dude needs Jesus very badly. In the next panel, we find Niro screaming due to his frustration, but he was promptly whipped as punishment by one of the escorts. Suddenly, a rabid wolf attacks and kills a slave. Thankfully, the escorts fended it off and they continued the journey. Once the slaves arrived at the mines, they were immediately ordered to work. One miner attempted to get out of mining and get into the administrative force as he was originally a commoner, but he was beheaded by the warden instantly. That man should have kept his head down. Sometime later, we see Niro mining inside when a monster suddenly appears, overpowering the warden and killing a guard. As the monster was about to kill the warden, Niro swoops in and kills the monster. In the next scene, we're informed that the master didn't sell off the twins to the blonde noble despite his persistence, and in the mines, Niro was promoted as a guard due to his skill with the sword. Finally, some good news. The MC has been taking a lot of L's. The warden explains that Niro is just a temporary guard, but since he's now on guard duty, the warden assigns an elite Dark Knight to teach Niro how to use a sword. They notice that Niro is improving quickly and realize that Niro is probably a natural-born genius, so it's unfortunate he's a slave. During the training, we see a goblin behind the hills, most likely planning an attack. Niro is about to go back to mining with a smile on his face when he stumbles upon other slaves who are upset that he was in a better state than them. Ah yes, it's been a while since we've seen annoying side characters. After this clash, an elderly slave talks to Niro, who calls out how ungrateful the other slaves were, but it was natural, as it was human nature to hate people who are doing better than them. Moments later, the sound of a horn is heard, signaling combat. As Niro comes out of the mine, he sees the warden on his knees in front of a massive monster leading the goblins. Man's got a neck longer than one piece. The warden states that they already called for reinforcements, but just then, he was beheaded by the giant monster. The elite Dark Knight, the teacher of Niro, appears and kills a couple of goblins, but he was promptly killed by the giant monster as well. Should have hired the goblin slayer instead. Scared, Niro goes back to the mines where all the slaves are on their knees, ready to submit to the monster as their new master. Unfortunately, the monsters wanted nothing but meat, so they moved forward to kill the slaves. But Niro protected them by killing the goblins. Outside, a portal appears, killing a monster with fire magic. Back inside the mines, we see Niro at the tip of the giant monster's sword, on the verge of death despite his success killing the goblins. As the monster was about to kill and eat Niro, the Emperor appears, killing the monster with fire coming out of his sword. As his last words, Niro wanted the Emperor to bestow his deed to his sisters, but the Emperor refused to do so as he heals Nero's wounds. 3 slaves stepped forward, stating that Niro was useless, and they were the ones who protected the mine. Seeing through their lies, the Emperor burned them to crisp with his fire magic. Keep in mind, lying to the Emperor will always go badly. At that moment, he declares that Niro will attend Excanum as a reward for his heroic act of protecting the mines and his people. Niro is with Wendy and Sylvie once again, bidding an emotional farewell as he must attend Excanum. At that moment, he is called by the driver as they were about to leave. Niro is about to ride in the back of the cart where the luggage is stored when a knight appears, demanding that Niro be treated with utmost care, much to the annoyance of Evan, who was inside the cart. Niro chose to ride in the luggage cart anyway, like how he originally intended to, most probably to avoid clashing with the entitled nobles inside the cart. The knight yields, but he warns the driver that if Niro arrives in the academy with a sickly disease, punishment will be in store. During the trip, Niro holds his sword and reminisces about the moment when he had just made a full recovery. The Emperor gave him the sword of Nero's warden, Gigas, and it was at this time Niro was able to hold a sword without consequence as a slave. Once they arrived in Excanum, Niro and the Regas family, which included Ivan and his escort, were welcomed by the guards. It was then revealed that Niro is to be an adoptive son of the Regas family, as declared by the Emperor, much to the shock of Evan. My boy is really good at getting adopted. As they enter the academy, Ivan orders Niro not to associate himself with him and to act like Niro is not part of the Regas family. I had high hopes for you, little Evan. At the hall, we find every new student gathered, and at the next floor is the headmistress of the academy, Kadia Maraguez, welcoming the students. She specifically mentions the descendants of the heroes who aided Emperor Muren during the last war, the descendants from families of the great sages, Kundin and Atramis. the three royal families of the Elven Queen, Lundale, and the family of the Black Knight, Gayan. Nice. World-building time. Niro was silently ostracized by nearby students as he was a slave, unlike most of the students in the hall. After the welcoming ceremony, they were taken to a field, in which they were informed by a bald instructor that they must pass an entrance exam next month in order to become official students of the academy. Otherwise, they will be sent home. The exam will require 5 students, so they must form groups of 5. And this group can be composed of different genders. Oh, it's not 3 this time. That's surprising. Male students were hopeful to get in the same group as the 3 elves from the royal family, but as elves have great hearing, they were slapped by one of the elf princesses as a result. That's some female lead vibes. It is at this moment Niro admired the princess. Definitely the female lead. Once the groups are decided, it's revealed that Niro and Even are in the same group, along with a female slave and 2 male nobles. Of course, the 2 rivals are in the same group. Who would have thought? As soon as the group enters their room, Evan orders Niro and the female slave to take a bath as he doesn't want the room to stink. He also instructs Niro to call him master. Outside, the female slave tries to talk with Niro, but he simply advises her to stay low-key to avoid trouble. While in the bathhouse, Niro contemplates why the Emperor allowed him to live, and comes to the conclusion that he must have intended for Niro to prove himself in the academy. I really hope that's the case and the Emperor isn't just a jerk. When Niro gets back to the room, Avon orders him to do their laundry, to which he agrees. When the female slave comes to help, Niro explains that she shouldn't meddle with his chores. At night, one of the 2 nobles demanded the female slave to dance, but as she cannot do so, she sang instead. Shortly after, they went to sleep. Poor kids versus entitled kids. In the following morning, Niro brings breakfast for Even, but Even demands he bring the breakfast of the 2 nobles in their group as well. Niro hurriedly goes back to the cafeteria, along with the female slave. On their way back to their room, the female slave bumped into Niro, causing him to drop the bowl containing the food. As a result, the 2 slaves had to give away their breakfast instead. As they were cleaning up the mess, Niro scolds the female slave, but at this moment, he's reminded of what the elderly slave talked about in the mines. Don't be a jerk, Niro. The next day, the students gathered in a field and were instructed to choose an opponent for a match. The fat noble chose Niro, thinking he was weak, and the other noble in their group chose the female slave. Niro, however, split the fat noble's wooden sword in half in an instant. It was at this moment he knew. He messed up. Niro's opponent thought his sword must have broken because it's in bad condition. The instructor, hearing this, gave the fat noble another sword, but again, Niro split it in half with ease, much to the surprise of the instructor, Even, and the elf princess. Niro really be stomping kids. It was then that the instructor decided Niro was simply skilled with the sword. Shortly after, the instructors told the winners to move to the right and losers to the left. Surprisingly, Niro was the first one in the right side of the field, then the elf princess. The 2 talked to one another, with Niro addressing the princess as Miss. When the princess questions this, Niro explains that he was a slave, much to the confusion of the princess, indicating that elves were not familiar with the slave system. Ah, typical. Only humans have a slave system. Avon then arrives, and it turns out he met the princess 3 years ago. But the princess cannot remember. Even moves close to Niro, silently threatening him for beating a noble. Reminds me of my brother when he gets in trouble because of me in front of our parents. That night, we find the female slave's face visibly beaten up when the 3 nobles, including Even, enter the room. Since Niro beat one of the nobles, they decided to punish Niro by ordering him to act like a horse and riding on his back. They do the same to the female slave. Once the nobles leave the room, the female slave proceeds to cry, but Niro remains smiling, advising his fellow slave to keep smiling as well. In the next scene, we find Niro pointing a sword towards Even while he's asleep. Wow, that's completely unexpected. After contemplating the consequences of killing Even and the potential danger that it could bring to his sisters, Niro decided not to go through with his plan. He goes back to his bed, but that does not mean his anger has subsided. These noble kids still need to be taught lessons. The next morning, we see an instructor who's about to teach the class about magic. He explains that everyone has mana, including slaves, and it is what allows people to perform magic. The instructor then demonstrates this by instructing one of the students to shout Anakrasha, the chant to use magic, motivating everyone to do the same. While everyone is trying their best to use magic, Even shows off by using another chant to generate massive flames. What a show-off. Everyone, including the instructor, praises him for his achievement, but when no other student is listening, The instructor silently warns Evan that casting unpermitted spells at his young age is illegal, so he discourages Evan from going overboard with his magic. Yes, you tell him. Niro also produces large flames, albeit smaller than Evan's, but it dissipates into a small size shortly after. The instructor then takes the class to a field with numerous dummies. He intends to teach the class Fire Arrow. At first, the students were upset as it was one of the most basic spells, but the instructor showed them how destructive it can be given the proper skills. He then concludes by saying only the people who can hit the dummy with Fire Arrow can go home. Nice incentive. After that, everyone was busy trying to accomplish the assignment. Niro, too, was trying his best, but to no avail. Suddenly, a fire arrow launches into one of Niro's shoes, burning part of it in the process, and it's revealed that it's a misfire from one of the nobles in his group. Niro was upset about this as it was his only pair of shoes and it was made for him by his adoptive mother. I really wish the exam comes already and these two spoiled nobles are sent home. As the sun sets, we see Niro still trying his best to hit the dummy with his fire arrow. Aside from the instructor, he was the only one left in the field. When he finally succeeds, he thanks his instructor for his patience, but the instructor states that he knows Niro was holding back, and Niro must show his full potential if he wishes to avoid punishment. That's when Niro launches a large fireball to the dummy, destroying it completely. And that's when the instructor knew Niro was the MC. The instructor asks Niro the reason for hiding his strength, to which Niro answers is because he doesn't want to stand out. The instructor then realizes that Niro does not fear the nobles, but despises them. So he advises Niro to control his anger as anger will only consume him. Later, one of the instructors explained that the exam will begin in 3 days, and it'll be a test of strength. In this exam, 2 members in each group will fail. Finally, 3 days to go before the 2 spoiled nobles are gone. During the exam, they can only use 1 weapon and 1 spell, Fire Arrow. Their goal is to reach the end of a trail in which monsters will be lurking and will be trying to kill them. The students were shocked as they were never informed about this level of danger in the academy beforehand. But since the instructors can revive them if they were to die, it was perfectly fine. Apparently, in this world, people don't die if they are killed. Of course, many students were against this idea. The nobles, in particular, demanded that this was unacceptable. But the magic instructor explained that what happens to them is of no concern to their parents, as they are now soldiers. The parents have also agreed to these conditions. But if there's a student who wishes to forfeit before the exam, they can do so freely. Unsurprisingly, no one forfeits. So the exam will proceed without issues in 3 days. Lastly, the female instructor explains that at the end of the trail, there's a wooden bridge. Here, the students can defeat their group mates should they ever meet, since only 3 will remain in each group. This excited Niro, and probably the readers too. Finally, time for payback. As Niro wakes up the following day and he finds his shoes torn apart, it turns out one of the nobles in his group used it for his morning jog, destroying it in the process. These little shits really can't stop being annoying. But this just makes the payback much more worthwhile. The female slave asked the female instructor for a new pair of shoes, but it wasn't possible to get one. Then, the day of the exam arrives. Niro, Evan, and the 2 nobles are at the entrance of the trail, with the female slave nowhere to be seen and can potentially be disqualified, which upsets Niro. Regardless, the 4 start to their way to the goal. Niro struggles to navigate the trail and fight the monsters as he was barefooted. However, the female slave arrives, giving him a new pair of shoes she made with her own shoes. Must protect that smile at all costs. Despite being in tick-tock condition, the 2 nobles also struggle to defeat the monsters and even sustains injuries along the way. They talk big, yet they're this weak. Once they reach the intersection of the routes, they meet up with Evan. While they were talking, Niro takes the chance to go to the wooden bridge before them and prepares to defeat the nobles. Finally, the fat noble moves toward Niro, demanding him to move, but Niro refuses and stabs him in his shoulders. Niro then pushes the noble to the side, causing him to fall, but as promised, the instructor saves the noble from falling to certain death. The other noble walks towards Niro and swings his sword, but Niro easily blocks it, breaking the sword in the process. With no weapon, the noble uses Fire Arrow, thinking Niro cannot counterattack as he had no talent in magic. Little did he know, Niro was goated at magic. Much to the noble's surprise, Niro launches an even bigger Fire Arrow, causing the noble to fall. Now, it was Evan's turn to fight Niro, who asked why Evan knew destroying shoes would make it impossible for Niro to pass the exam. Evan refuses to answer, and a fight ensues. They were on equal footing at first, both in magic and swordsmanship, when Evan uses an unpermitted spell, teleportation. That cheating bastard. Curious about its outcome, the magic instructor didn't interrupt the fight despite Evan violating the rules of using only one spell. After catching Niro off guard, Evan launches a powerful flame attack, causing Niro to almost fall, but he manages to hold onto the bridge's ledge. Evan then launches another flame attack to finish Niro off, but he was left unscathed as his pendant protected him. Item diff. Using this chance, Niro fires a fire arrow and knocks Evan off the bridge, but like Niro, Evan manages to hold onto the ledge. Little bro really pulled the Uno reverse card. Since only 2 can fail in the exam, Niro helped Evan climb back up. He then comes back for the female slave before finishing the course. In the first panel, we find Niro and the female slave talking at a rooftop about how they were able to get admitted to the academy despite their social status. That's nice, but can we get her name now? The female slave explains that she was an only child who grew up with her dad. Their master was a kind person, so when the master's son was drowning, her dad risked life to save the son. Unfortunately, her dad died, and the son was basically comatose. Since the son was originally planning to go to Excanum, the master gave the admission letter to attend Excanum to the female slave, hence why she was able to get admitted to the academy. Goes without saying that her master is infinitely better than the other masters in this world. Later that day, the students were instructed to gather around the storage house. There, they receive and promptly change into their uniforms as they are now official students of the academy. The headmistress congratulated them and wished them luck, before promptly disappearing. Afterward, the baldy instructor proceeds to group the students into 6. This time, even Niro the female slave and Niro are in separate groups. Finally, away from that mischievous little brat, Niro in particular is grouped with the elf princess he talked to before, Terasu, the descendant from the family of the Black Knight, Tarek, and 3 other side characters that are probably not worth mentioning. Tarek is probably the meathead character. Another difference this time is that the group will not share a single room. Instead, boys and girls will be separated into different dorms. When asked who wants to be the group leader, both Tarek and Terasu raise their hands, and they are tasked by the instructor to settle it themselves. They settle on deciding with strength. Tarek is confident since the Black Knight family was known for their strength, which is apparent when carries the boulder easily. They decided that the leader will be the one who can break the boulder into the smallest pieces. Tarek goes first and uses a sword to split the boulder in half. I knew it. He's definitely a meathead. Terasu is a bit more ingenious as she uses a bow and arrow to hit the 2 pieces of boulder, shattering them into smaller pieces. As a result, Terasu becomes the group leader, much to the admiration of Niro. Niro's group is gathered in the academy's hallway. There, they discuss the rules that each member of the group must adhere to, with Terasu leading the discussion. She explains the first rule that they must move and act as a group, so everything must be agreed upon by the majority. Secondly, boys must not come within 10 centimeters of the girls' dorms. The boys must also avoid opening the doors of their rooms without permission. Dang, if only my parents followed that rule. She explains that they must also call out their names if they wish to make contact. And third, there will be no difference between the ranks of the 6 members of the group. Most members reacted strongly to this rule, except Tarek. One member expresses concern that using informal speech to Terasu may not be appropriate as she was an elf princess, but he promptly yielded as Terasu explains that ranks in the elf society was not a sign of privilege, but a sign of achievement, and being a noble means they have bigger shoes to fill. As such, ranks were meaningless outside of their society. This enlightened Niro since all the nobles he encountered had used their title to take advantage of commoners and slaves. My boy was born in the wrong society. This rule also raised concerns from the 2 girls in their group as they complain that they don't want to be treated like Niro, a slave. They seek validation from Tarek, but Tarek explains that he's never seen slaves as people lower than him. Rather, he only values strength and has been friends with his slaves. He might be a meathead, but he's more mature than all the noble kids combined. All but Niro has given his opinion on this matter. Since they require the majority to agree to the rule, the girl asks Niro what he has to say. He responds by saying that he believes strength must be the basis of ranks, so he wants to be treated the same as the other nobles, unless they can prove they're stronger than him. Finally, he's standing up for himself. Niro realizes that not all nobles have the same mindset. Some think differently, like Tarek and Terasu. If only everyone was like that. As they were about to leave, they bump into the group of one of the elf princesses, the green-haired one, which is also the group where Evan belongs to. The green-haired elf teases Terasu since she has a meathead and a slave as her teammates, but Terasu makes a comeback by saying the green-haired elf should worry about his own teammate, even considering how he got wrecked in the last exam. What a legendary comeback. After that, the two groups go their own ways. The atmosphere was a bit cold after that encounter, so Niro's groupmate explains to him that their rivalry was because they're fighting for the throne. Terasu, along with the two elf princesses, are the only candidates, and Terasu, in particular, must become a queen since her family hasn't had a queen for 7 generations. If she fails as well, her family may fall out of the royal family, hence why she's incredibly tense. The following day, the monocle instructor explains that the second exam would be a 3 versus 3 competition, where the team will be split in 2 and only the winning group will move on to become second-year students. Well, obviously Turek, Terasu, and Niro will win. It's unfortunate. I like the other elf member. For that reason, in their first year, their focus will be on teamwork. Unfortunately, no one will know who's their teammate and who's their enemy before and during the exam. That's great. It discourages internal fighting and sabotages. They proceed in their first lesson, in which each member draws lots to decide the grouping. Terasu, Niro, and the other elf students are in the same group. Their goal is to head towards a boulder, all while their feet are tied together. This is to hone their mental focus. As soon as Terasu's group starts walking, the elf student slipped and broke his kneecap. Since Terasu is the competitive type, she threatens the elf student to get right back up, and they proceed to walk once again. Terasu's group continues to struggle with the exercise, but Tarek's group is easily dominating since he's carrying the 2 girls rather than walking in sync with them. Turek is literally carrying his team. Back to Terasu's group, the elf student falls again, so Terasu promptly hits him repeatedly. Much to Niro's surprise, the elf student seems to be enjoying the attention. So, Niro does the same, and then the elf student, and that's how they lost the exercise. As they prepare to go back to their rooms, Turek removes his uniform to reveal his muscular body, which the 2 girls admire. Turek is the Riz Lord, but since it was inappropriate, Terasu threatens him to do that in their own room. So, the boys ran to their room, but rather than entering their room, they decided to peek at the girls' room instead, led by Turek. Terasu catches them in the act and pulls a knife on them, leading the 3 boys to fall, who knew Turek would be the pervert character. The next day, the group and the monocle instructor head to the spirit forest, where their first field examination will take place. The instructor explains that the forest is full of powerful spirits. He instructs Terasu not to use her power to commune with these spirits in this challenge, since the goal of the exam would be to get to the designated location while avoiding and defending against these powerful spirits. In the end, it requires teamwork as they have to watch out for each other's backs. He then signals the start of the challenge, but before Niro can get inside the forest, the instructor takes his pendant, indicating that the pendant may have a feature related to spirits. This pendant sure is more mysterious than Elle and Kira. In the next scene, we see the spirit of the ground who's about to hit Terasu. She instructs the orange-haired girl to cast the defensive earth spell, but the girl forgot the incantation, just as the hit was about to connect. Niro saves Terasu by blocking the hit with his body. After taking the hit, Niro falls to the ground. Terasu and the girl were worried for his life, but the instructor isn't worried as he casted a protection spell on the students when they were asleep. True enough, Niro woke up clearly enjoying the attention, so Terasu healed him with her elf powers. Then, they continued to go their way. During the trip, Terasu states that she was thirsty, so Niro hurriedly looks for a leaf and uses it to gather water, which he then gives Terasu. Oh no, Niro has become a massive simp. During their conversation, the orange-haired girl senses movement nearby and shoots a fire arrow in that direction, hitting a hatchling in the process. Terasu recognizes that it's a green dragon's hatchling, meaning they become an enemy of the forest and the green dragon. Queen of the forest will soon appear, when a teammate triggers the boss fight while you're still unprepared. Once the queen arrived, everyone bowed down. Terasu communes with the dragon and offers their deepest apology, explaining that they didn't intend to hurt the hatchling. However, the queen cannot be convinced and states that only by offering the person who hurt the hatchling as a sacrifice will the queen's anger subside. Hearing this conversation, Niro takes the blame instead and explains how it all went, except rather than the orange-haired girl, he tells the queen that he was the one who hit the hatchling. After this, Niro was able to convince the queen to let this go, but after learning that Niro was a half-elf, which was considered the cursed race by the elves, Terasu was in shock. Terasu exclaims that half-elves are the cursed race and leaves. After that, the monocle instructor instructs Niro to come see him after the challenge. The group continued to head towards the designated location, and while in a fight against the water spirit, Niro casts a protective spell towards Terasu to protect her, but she dodges it intentionally and is hit by the spirit. She's griefing the team so hard. While Niro was helping her up, Terasu declines his help and tells him that she and him will be strangers from now on. After the challenge, Tarek greets them, but they don't greet back. Much to the surprise of Tarek, Niro proceeds to meet with the monocle instructor, who then explains the relationship between elves and half-elves. Nice, world-building time. He explains that half-elves have both the harmonious side of elves and the chaotic side of humans. These qualities amplify each other, so some half-elves are kinder than other elves, but unfortunately, the majority of half-elves succumb to their chaotic side and become darker and more sinister than the average human being. As such, half-elves are prone to being consumed by darkness. This explains why Terasu is giving him the cold shoulder. In the next scene, we see the three boys running towards the exam as they're about to be late. The three are clearly going alone. They then meet up with the three girls. Terasu is still upset by the fact that Niro is a half-elf. In the exam location, they were greeted by the female instructor and the monocle instructor, who explain that the next exam is a test of wisdom. Before proceeding with the test, they decide the groupings by drawing lots again. Niro, Tarek, and Terasu end up in the same group. Oh no, the elf student will most definitely get disqualified. Upon entering the testing ground, they find the Magznia tree, a tree that bears the all-cure fruit. Their objective is to chase away a bird called the Aragon that's nesting on the tree, so the Empire can collect the fruits more easily. They can use any method, but they must not harm the bird nor the tree. The instructor tells the group that they have until sunset to accomplish the objective. After he leaves, Terasu instructs Niro and Tarek that they don't do anything reckless as she tries to think of a solution, and she promptly leaves. Moments later, we find the other group going at it immediately. I bet they'll get disqualified right there and then. The black-haired girl uses her bow to shoot an arrow to perhaps startle the bird. The elf student tries to stop her, but she's already launched the arrow. This backfires and hits the stem of a fruit, causing it to fall. The professors appear right after and disqualify the group for wasting the sacred fruit. Oh man, too bad they had to take the elf student down with them. It was then that the professors explained that the purpose of this exam is to filter out soldiers who are unable to follow orders. Seeing this, Tarek assumes that their group won by default, but the monocle professor explains that both groups can be disqualified in this exam, and there are no winners by default. So, Tarek and Niro continue to wait for Terasu to think of a solution. It's already past 2, so the two worried. At that moment, Terasu comes back with a snake. She plans to use these snakes to show the Aragon that her hatchlings will be at risk if the bird remains nestled in the 3. Unfortunately, this plan backfired as well as Aragon simply feeds the snakes to her hatchlings. Upon seeing this, Terasu instructs her groupmates to just YOLO and steal one of the hatchlings, but the Aragon is too strong and prevents them from climbing. Terasu, with all hopes lost, decides to use the same method as the previous group used to use a bow and arrow and threaten the bird. Again, it didn't work as the Aragon is too strong, and she falls on her knees. After much contemplating, Niro comes up with a plan to threaten the Aragon, a force of nature, with another force of nature. More specifically, he proposes to use a wildfire. Nice, my boy Niro pulling through for the team. Niro, Tarek, and Terasu proceed with the plan right away. They use their magic to generate a wildfire. The smoke startled the Aragon, but it wasn't enough. So, Terasu used an unfamiliar magic spell to amplify the flames, scaring away Aragon completely. And as such, they have passed the test. The monocle professor states that it was the perfect solution as Aragons were vulnerable to fire as they rely on the power of the wind. In the next scene, we find Tarek and Niro saying their goodbyes to a crying Jen, their elf friend, who then promptly leaves. Too bad, he was one of the decent characters in this story. Shortly after, Terasu arrives after taking a bath and asks Niro to come inside the room. The two boys react strongly as they have perverse thoughts about the situation. Inside, Terasu offers Niro some expensive tea, which Niro had trouble taking as it was too expensive. Then, Terasu explains her situation to Niro and why she acted coldly toward him. She tells the story of her uncle, a half-elf, who she was close to in the past. He was kind to her, even though he was shunned by her family. The uncle then fell in love with the housemaid, Adele, but due to the difference between their status, he was forbidden by the family elder to see him again. That's when he became corrupted by his chaotic side, leading to a massacre. I see there are also some assholes in the elf society. For that reason, Terasu has decided to never believe in anyone else again, especially half-elves, hence her attitude towards Niro. Niro reassures her that he won't take that path, and as the atmosphere becomes heated, Terasu takes a moment to shoot an arrow toward the window, which turns out is where Tarek is as he's trying to peek at the two. After that, Terasu leaves the room. Tarek really had to ruin the mood for Niro, lol. After having passed the second exam, the bald professor congratulates the remaining students. Like last time, they will be separated into different groups. That's too bad. I like the dynamic between the three. Unfortunately, Niro was grouped with a bunch of unfamiliar students. Terasu was grouped with one of the elf princesses and Even, while Tarek was grouped with Miria. Upon entering the room, they find that there's a mess, and like the entitled kids they are, they order Niro to clean the mess. Man, I wish he stands up for himself this time. They also assign him to be the group leader as they think it would be a hassle. In Tarek's group, other groupmates have the same attitude towards Miria, but Tarek interrupts by making it clear that discrimination is not allowed in that group, and they must abide by that rule since Tarek is the group leader. Yes, you tell them. You magnificent, Meathead. Meanwhile, in Terasu's group, Terasu proposes that she be the group leader, to which one of the members suggests Evan is also a good candidate. However, Evan declines and lets them decide for themselves. That night, we see Evan taking his clothes off and activating his magic, which is apparently a way to test the limits of his blood. Evan might be more of a pervert than Tarek. Terasu appears and stops him as it's possible to die if he keeps going at it, but he explains that he'd rather die than lose and shame his family's honor. The next day, every group is supposed to gather, but Nero's groupmates didn't appear. The bald professor tells him that the next time they're late, he'd be held responsible. His teammates are total griefers. Niro continues to get discriminated against in his group as he's forced to do all the chores. For the next exercise, they were taken to the Skibus Hills, also known as the birthplace of life as it was brimming with plants and animals. Their goal here is to exterminate blade rams roaming around the area since this animal isn't supposed to be in the Skibus Hills. In other words, blade rams are an invasive species in this region. They got lost and are going to get killed for it. Sad life. The students are tasked with killing as many blade rams as they can. The group that hunts the most will receive the reward for this exercise. The students are also warned that blade rams cannot be hunted alone, so they must work together. Let me guess, Niro will be forced to hunt alone. However, since the professors are not there to monitor the students, they must be extra careful since they won't receive any help, no matter how much they need it. As expected, Niro's groupmates just left him alone, so he was forced to hunt the blade rams by himself. They have worse coordination and teamwork than people in public lobbies. Niro manages to find and kill one blade ram by himself. While resting, another one appears. Since Niro wasn't able to catch his breath, he wasn't able to kill the second blade ram. After a long fight, the blade ram manages to push Niro off a cliff where he was injured severely. He cannot move and was unable to do anything, even when vultures flock toward him. However, Niro appears and scares away the vultures. She tries to get to him, but she falls and injures herself as well. As I said, we must protect her at all costs. Niro proceeds to heal Niro of his injuries, which surprised Niro since the professors have yet to use healing magic. Niro explains that she figured it out by herself by healing her severely injured friend in the past. Wow, so Niro is talented as well. Niro tries to cast healing magic, but Niro tells him it might be an innate ability she was born with. Niro then asks Niro why she's still able to help people despite being treated unfairly by most nobles. To which she explains that she simply ignores the bad things that happen to her and focuses on her goals. Niro, however, disagrees as he wants to conquer those things instead of ignoring them. Let's agree to disagree. After that talk, Niro meditates in hopes of regaining his mana. Niro does the same. After a while, they were able to recover their mana and energy and made a plan to climb back up. Niro decided to simply carve a path to the outside, and that's the mindset he decided to have from now on. Finally, some character development. The two manage to climb back up, and one of the guards monitoring the students finds them and takes them back to the group. Upon tallying the scores of each group, the average was 3 rams, but Teresa's group managed to kill 5, making them the winner. Niro's group complained that they didn't win because they lacked one more person. Wow, the audacity these guys have. At that moment, Niro and Niria arrive with the 2 rams, which the guard states were Niro's kills, much to the shock of everyone. Niro's group starts to celebrate since that means they have won, but Niro decides to give the kills to Niria's group since she saved him. His groupmates naturally become upset, but Niro stands up to them. My boy finally grew a pair. In the room that Terasu's group occupies, we see Evan taking a quick look at Terasu, indicating that he might be interested in her. Meanwhile, Tarek and Niria are taking a hike, when Niria twists her legs and falls, so Tarek carries her. We then see Niro using his sword on a tree. Right before cutting it down, he communes with it. It turns out he's trying to cut down a tree in one swing, but he has yet to do so. He's really going all in on the grind. 9 months later, the students are gathered in front of a gate. The bald professor explains that this is where the third examination, the test of endurance, will be held. Adult Miro's group mates get eliminated. In this exam, the goal is simple: survive for 2 months. They're provided food supplies that can't possibly last for even 1 month, so the students will have to come up with a source of food by themselves. The testing ground is a tree, a hog, and edible mushrooms mixed with poisonous ones. Thankfully, endurance is one of the strengths of Niro, but the exam is difficult nonetheless. 2 weeks later, we find one of Niro's group mates shooting an arrow at the hog. He successfully kills it and eats the meat. The next day, he finds that the meat is already rotten. He tries to eat it regardless, but he vomits everything and gets disqualified. The same happened to another one of Niro's group mate when he ate one of the mushrooms. Sirs, you right. We also find another one of Niro's group mate who's about to get ran by the hog but was promptly saved by the monocle professor. But as a result, he got disqualified. Finally, no one will miss them. Upon hearing the announcements of their disqualifications, Niro decides to make a move. He starts by communing with the hog, but the hog has been trained by the academy, so it didn't listen. Then, he sees the hog eating mushrooms and assumes that the hog must know which of the mushrooms are edible and which are poisonous. When he attempts to move closer, the hog scares him into climbing the tree. Then, the hog goes to sleep. The monocle instructor states that this exam will drive the students to show their true natures as their resources are heavily limited. True enough, the students are showing their true colors. Avon uses his overwhelming magic to intimidate the hog into obeying him. Terasu befriends the hog. Niria passed out due to hunger, so out of pity, the hog gave her food voluntarily. Tarek wrestles with the hog to decide who will bring food to the other. Yes, a meathead against another meathead, a match made in heaven. On the other hand, Niro decides to jump on top of the hog and basically rodeos the creature day and night. Once the hog runs out of stamina, Niro throws out crackers in front of it as an offering. He continues to do so until he's able to finally befriend the hog. After giving all of his crackers to the hog, Niro proposes that they survive together, and they eat the crackers together. We then see a contrast between Evan and Niro, where Evan is forcing the hog to get food for him, and Niro is coexisting harmoniously with the hog. The two are complete opposites. No wonder they don't get along. Another month has passed, and Niro has successfully passed the exam. As always, the headmistress congratulates the students and new groups of 5 are formed. Again, Even and Terasu are in the same group, but this time together with Niro. It's like Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura all over again. And like before, Terasu becomes the group leader. When another is being formed, Niria was called, and as she goes to her group mates, she bumps into Niro. Niro then finds a much thinner and prettier Niria. Oh, finally, the glow-up we've been waiting for. It turns out that after starving herself in the last exam and almost dying from hunger, Niria lost a lot of weight. After greeting each other, they then go to their respective groups. Just like before, Terasu sets up the rules right away. She warns the 4 boys in his group not to come near her room. On their way back to their rooms, Niro bumps into Even, who, as always, expresses his irritation towards Niro. Little bro has no chill. In the next scene, we find the bald professor greeting Niro and the Terasu, which was a shock to Even since he greeted a slave before me. After that, the professor explains that they'll undergo a physical test. Nice. Niro will have his time to show off. The first exercise was to throw a heavy ball with a chain attached. The gray-haired noble went first, then Terasu, who threw farther than him. The other noble teases him for losing to Terasu before throwing the ball, but it also ended up falling short. Even then went next and was successful at throwing the ball farther than Terasu. Lastly, Niro threw the ball, surpassing the ball of Evan, even getting a bit salty. The next exercise was a running race. Terasu was able to dominate the competition since elves are known for their speed. So, Niro and Even were just fighting for second place. Niro was winning at first, but Even got incredibly salty that he was able to outrun Niro at the last second. Witness the power of salt. After the race, Terasu offered Niro a drink from her water bag, to which he responded by asking Terasu to drink first to see if it was poisoned. A callback to when Niro offered water to Terasu during their first year. They both laughed, which came as a surprise to Even since he rarely sees Terasu laugh. Ooh, Evan is getting a bit jelly. While Evan is carving a piece of wood, he sees Niro and Terasu conversing while drinking tea. Since he didn't think Terasu was the type to behave casually, Niro's intimacy with Terasu infuriated him. Evan is down bad. Later that day, the monocle professor meets up with Terasu's group. He tells them they'll be learning about large-scale magic attacks this time rather than single-target spells. He also explains that these kinds of spells require a massive amount of mana, so it's going to be difficult to master this type of magic attack. It shouldn't be a problem with the MC though. The professor then goes on to talk about the different types of jobs in this world. There are 3 primary jobs: Black Knight, which specializes in strength, Black Mage, which is suitable for people with large mana pools, and Archer, which is most compatible with people who have keen intellect like elves. Oh, so it's just like an RPG. Cool. Interestingly, there are also other jobs out there, like Dark Lords, as mentioned by one of Niro's groupmates. Turns out there are indeed other jobs, which are typically derived from the 3 primary jobs. For example, there was a Magic Swordsman, a combination of a Black Knight and a Black Mage. The current Emperor, Emperor Muren, is an example of a Magic Swordsman. But since this job requires immense talent, not many people can be Magic Swordsmen. So, basically, it's a rare class, just like an RPG indeed. The professor then proceeds to showcase one of the large-scale magic attacks they will learn, a Rufiona, which allows one to eliminate surrounding enemies. So, each student tries it out, starting with a black-haired noble. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to showcase his power. Next is Terasu, which was able to use it more effectively. Then, Niro goes on to try it as well, but he was even worse than the black-haired noble. Wow, didn't expect that from an MC. This shocked Niro since he knew he was talented in magic, but the professor explains to him that it might be due to a problem with his heart, since it's what controls the flow of mana. Lastly, Evan goes ahead and casts the spell, and with the power of anger, he was able to showcase its full potential. He then declares then and there that he's going to be a magic swordsman, like the Emperor. This is Sasuke and Naruto competing for the Hokage position all over again. Due to his problem with magic, Niro decides to train intensely by casting a Rufiona repeatedly, but he still can't cast it properly. Meanwhile, Terasu just watches him from behind a tree. That's nice. Emotional support. 4 months pass. The bald professor takes the group to a valley where a mine containing Onmaru, a type of magic ore, is located. Due to the value of Onmaru, the valley has always been a place of bloodbaths and a place full of guards. However, since it is a rest day, the academy has decided to use that opportunity to train the students. The bald professor explains that the test is to find the entrance to the mine, which is small and hidden. The price is a piece of equipment and will only go to 1 person per group. Before the bald professor finishes the explanation, the group goes ahead to complete the task. Since this is a free-for-all activity, they go their own ways after defeating a couple of golem monsters. To each their own, I guess. Terasu continues to defeat every golem monster she stumbles upon. Then, she finds a large group of golem monsters in a field, when suddenly, a group of actual monsters appears to kill the golems. Then, we cut to Niro fighting the golem monsters, when suddenly, a man appears out of nowhere from a bush nearby, telling him to run. He wonders if this was part of the test, but it became clear that it wasn't when the guard was killed in front of Niro by actual monsters. Evan also finds a group of monsters in a field and realizes that this is no longer part of the test. Shortly after, he hears a scream. Unfortunately, the bald professor didn't hear this since he's sleeping in a cave behind a waterfall. Hey Baldy, your students are in danger. Niro, however, heard the scream, recognizing it to be Terasu's. Terasu got the short end of the stick there. We then find Terasu fighting a couple of the monsters by herself with her bow and arrow. However, it's clear that she'll slowly get overwhelmed as there are many more remaining. True enough, she runs out of arrows, and when she attempts to use a Rufiona, she realizes she's out of mana from using the magic arrows. Left with no way to fight back, the monsters attack her aggressively, but Niro comes to the rescue and kills the monsters. He tried to cast a Rufiona, but again, it didn't go off. His magic power is probably on a vacation right now. Seeing this, the monsters continue to attack the two, but Even also comes to the rescue and launches several magic missiles toward the monsters. With Even helping the two, they were able to hold their own against the army of monsters more easily. As the three stand side by side, the monster leader remembers the time when the three heroes were fighting against them 30 years ago. This time, however, Niro, Even, and Terasu are much weaker. So he commands his underlings to attack. This monster is really about to beat a bunch of kids. Niro states that he'll take the boss monster while Even and Terasu take care of the underlings, since Even is the only one who can cast large-scale attacks at the moment. However, Even, being the prideful noble he is, didn't agree with the plan. Regardless, Niro proceeds to attack the monster leader, but the monster beats him up easily after judging his swordsmanship. The monster really had the time to roast Niro. Even also tries to attack the monster, and though he did better than Niro, he was overpowered in the end and was punched. sending him to Tarasu. Thankfully, he was able to block the damage with his mana shield. But now he and Tarasu are out of mana, so Niro is their only hope. Come on, man. Show them who's the main character. Niro continues to defeat the small fries, but he's still unable to activate a Rufiona despite the immense amount of mana he feels within him. In the end, the monsters manage to attack him successfully. When Tarasu was about to rescue him, he even stops her and suggests they run instead. We then cut back to Niro, who's having a moment in his inner thoughts. It's power-up time. After a while, he unleashes a massive wave of magic, eliminating all the monsters around him. After casting the spell, Niro falls unconscious. Distraught after the annihilation of his army, the monster leader tries to attack Niro, but the monocle professor appears and kills the monster, who then warns him that he's not the final boss. However, thankfully for the academy, the big titty headmistress is there and kills the boss instantly. The boss didn't even last for more than one panel. After the headmistress kills the boss, the other professors and guards proceed to annihilate the monster army. Then we find Niro in a cart being healed by the elf professor. Niro wasn't wearing a uniform, so when Tarasu looked at him, she saw the pendant Niro was wearing and was surprised. Finally, they're gonna tell us what the pendant is. Back at the academy, the headmistress conducts an award ceremony for Niro, Tarasu, and Even to reward them for their heroic act of fighting against the large army of monsters. Everyone cheered for Tarasu and Even, but when it came to Niro, only Tarek and Neria cheered for him. But the other students followed suit. It was at this moment that Niro was able to receive praise from nobles. Nice. His life is finally changing for the better. After the ceremony, the bald professor tells them that they will be awarded 10 extra points for what they did, though it'll only be awarded in their 7th year. Each of them was also given an artifact. Niro thanks Evan for his help back in the valley, but even shrugs it off by saying he was simply testing his power. They then go their own ways when a professor teleports beside Evan and tells him the headmistress is looking for him. It turns out he was called because the headmistress wants to hand over the answer sheet for the last exam to Evan. Oh, you cheater. Just when you were getting better. In the next scene, the black-haired groupmate of Niro tells the group that the 4th exam will be a test of intelligence. As such, they are required to memorize the contents of the history book that is given to each of them. They have only 1 month to study, and they are to receive no help from anyone. That means there will be no study groups or anything of the sort. In addition, they can start studying tomorrow in the Great Library. Since Niro has been reading books since he was a kid, he was confident about passing this exam. What could go wrong? We then find Niro and Tarasu walking in the hallway when Tarasu suddenly asks Niro if he had read books about the elven family, to which he answers no since he didn't have books about elves. He asks Tarasu where this question came from, but she just shrugs it off. Tarasu is definitely hiding something. After that, we just see a montage of students studying and a scene where Niro was confused at the contents of the history book. After a month, the students finally received the results of the exam. Only 2 people failed, Ralph, who got 69. Nice. And Niro, who got 14 points. That's definitely sketchy. Since he failed, Niro was sent back home, escorted by 2 other slaves. On his way home, one of the slaves escorting Niro questions why he was relaxed, and promptly beats him. The slaves, Sargat, then explains that the Regis family permitted them to treat Niro as their slave, as his family is now the slave of the slaves. And here I thought only nobles were entitled. After arriving, Niro is greeted by Wendy and Sylvie. During their emotional reunion, a butler tells Niro that he's being called by his master. When he gets inside, the master throws a bottle at Niro, scolding him about treating Evan informally while inside the academy. Niro explains that they were ordered to behave that way, to which the elder master simply shrugs off, saying slaves should not talk back. As punishment, the master decided to sell off Nero's sisters. Much to Nero's terror, "You greedy bastard. I thought you were the good ones." What's worse is he's selling the sisters to Harvey, the killer of Nero's mother and father. Hearing this, Niro begs the master to kill him instead, but the master refuses. So, Niro goes to Harvey's house to beg him to buy him instead of his sisters. I really hope this guy dies soon. Ultimately, Harvey did decide to buy Niro after saying he's willing to do anything for him, even kill someone. When asked by the master why he changed his mind, Harvey explains that female slaves cost money to maintain, and male slaves are more profitable in the long run. Once they got to Harvey's home, Niro starts working right away, and for several days, he was overworked with minimal sleep. The author really likes doing the MC dirty. One night, the master calls Niro outside to vent his anger since he lost money. He proceeds by beating Niro to a pole with a whip. Harvey then provokes Niro by admitting that he's the one who killed his father by mixing poison in his medicine. He then admits to buying the mother and torturing her to death. Naturally, Niro became enraged and broke a piece of floor and prepares to stab Harvey. I can't wait to see karma hit this man in the face. Back at the academy, we see Tarasu walking in the hallway when he sees Evan talking about something related to Niro. Of course, it's aroused some suspicions in Tarasu, so she supposed a spirit to follow Evan's henchman. It turns out Evan was talking about Niro's book, and he ordered his henchmen to burn it. But right before they burned the book, the spirit Tarasu summoned was able to snatch it from them. Yes, please tell me this will get Niro back to the academy. We then cut back to Niro about to stab Harvey, but he stopped knowing what would happen to his sisters. After that, Harvey continues to punish Niro while Niro utters demeaning words. Meanwhile, Tarasu is seen outside of a room, where the monocle professor interrogates the two henchmen of Evan. It turns out that the black-haired noble made a completely different version of the history book and gave it to Niro. That's why he failed the exam. The monocle professor tells them that they'll be executed if they don't reveal who ordered them to make a copy of the history book. So, they reveal that Evan ordered them. That's it. Evan is officially an irredeemable garbage. Hearing this, Tarasu is furious, so he went to find Evan and sees him with the headmistress, who enters a room. In the room, it was revealed that Evan and the headmistress had a deal, and since Evan has done his side of the deal, it's time the headmistress gives him his reward, which is to basically take his virginity. Wow, Evan is an even bigger simp than Niro. However, as they were about to do it, Evan declined, stating that he has someone else he liked, Tarasu, much to the shock of Tarasu, who heard this entire conversation. In the next scene, we find Harvey still punishing Niro, who has already lost all hope. Thankfully, before Harvey whips him again, Olmu, the professor with the monocle, teleports and stops him. He then explains that Niro is now a fourth-year student at the Excanum Academy and is therefore an official officer of the Empire, with a social status higher than a commoner. So, Harvey basically assaulted someone who is of a higher standing than him. After hearing this, Niro stands up and asks Olmu what the punishment for such an act is, to which Olmu answers yes. So he grabs a bat, ready to enforce the law himself. Finally, this is what we've been waiting for. Niro prepares to kill Harvey, but Harvey pulls out a knife. Thankfully, Olmu helps Niro by restraining Harvey with a spell. As Niro was about to hit the man, he falls unconscious due to starvation. Dude got saved by the bell. After waking up, Niro ate until he was full, and he was once again ready to beat Harvey. Harvey tried to beg Niro to give him another chance, but Niro clearly didn't want to, as Harvey didn't give his mother another chance as well. But as Niro was about to kill Harvey, he remembers the story Tarasu told him about her uncle succumbing to his chaotic side. Fearing that he would succumb to it too after killing Harvey, Niro decided not to go through with it and left the house. Oh, come on. Seeing this, Harvey laughs at him, but thankfully, Olmu kills Harvey mercilessly. Olmu the MVP. Olmu takes Niro back to the academy, and on their way there, Olmu explains that the plan to sabotage Niro came from Evan. Unfortunately, since Evan has a lot of influential people backing him, nothing consequential will happen to Evan. What the? Of course. Back at the academy, we see the headmistress congratulating the 16 graduates of the Excanum Academy. All of them are now officers of the Empire, meaning Niro is no longer a slave. At this point, they will have to train and study for 4 more years in the academy, but there will no longer be disqualifications. 8 years? That's even longer than doctorate programs. During the ceremony, the headmistress realizes that there are only 15 of them there, which her assistant explains was because Marcus was disqualified and Niro will be taking his place. Much to the shock of Evan, but Turek, Tarasu, and Niro were glad to see he's back. The gang is back. As official officers, the 16 students now have different uniforms. Turek glances at Niro, but Niro looks for Niro. Oof, that must have hurt. Niro greeted Niro at each other, but Niro wasn't able to respond as she was flustered. Then, Tarasu appears and takes Niro to a private place. Once they're alone, Tarasu explains to Niro about his origins. It turns out that Niro is a half-elf from the Hilla family, one of the royal families in the elf society. More specifically, he's the son of Queen So Niro was royalty all this time but was treated as a slave? That's a big oof right there.